After all, in the beginning of their work before the early 90s days, neither Rick Ross nor Stephen Hassan were of much interest with their theories. However, starting from 1993, the media and even the FBI suddenly began to turn to them for advice. Did they conduct their destructive activities and perform deprogramming sessions simply because they were maniacs? Or did their actions contribute to implementation of a clearly defined plan of the enemy of democracy, which has brought America to the current state of panic and division? Both statements are true. The global enemy regarded the manic potential of these two fellows as a suitable material for turning them into its pawns, who are easy to manipulate and whose hands can destroy America from within. Activities of American representatives of the anti-cult movement are part of a planned strategy. Both Steve Hassan and Rick Ross are executors of the plans of America's enemy. What they currently implement, continuing to promote and impose the ideology of hatred and division, is nothing but information terrorist attacks aimed against the American population and against the USA as a country, even though they stopped using violent deprogramming techniques with their own hands. They receive support from the global enemy of democracy. So today, they continue deprogramming on an even larger scale and against a greater number of innocent law-abiding citizens. It's just that now, they are not doing it with their own hands, but with your hands and the hands of law enforcement agencies. A vivid illustration is that 30 years ago, in the early 90s, the number of violent raids on new religious movements increased dramatically and inexplicably for many people. Research that established this fact included statistics from 19 different countries, including the USA, Israel, and Western European countries. Wondering about the reasons behind such an upsurge, researchers traced a mobilization of anti-cult organizations, which occurred during that very period of time. However, the main essence and cause remained hidden for the researchers. The clue is that during this period of time, to be more precise in 1993, the global enemy of democracy activated its ideological center of the anti-cult movement, which has been located in Russia since that moment to this day. It is exactly from there that commands are given from, and a single ideological vector is set for the entire anti-cult movement worldwide, extending to its entire network. Now, using the example of this ideological center, let's discuss in detail how it operates in the country that it has turned into a testing ground for practicing its methods, which it plans to transfer and apply throughout the world in the near future.
Ideological center of anti-cult groups. The ideological center of the entire transnational network of contemporary anti-cult movement, and the chief developer of its propaganda methods, is the Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects, abbreviated as RATSEERS. The basis of RATSEERS is the Center for Religious Studies in the name of Hieromartyr Irenaeus of Lyon, established in 1993. This center was founded by the anti-cultist Alexander Dvorkin with the blessing of the then Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Alexei II. RATSEERS representatives cover their activities under the guise of an allegedly noble mission of defending the interests of the country's titular religion, namely Orthodox Christianity. However, the real situation is far more complicated. Within the religion itself, there are individuals who, while outwardly adhering to orthodoxy, actually support anti-cult movements. These individuals act in unison, pursuing their own goals and benefits, which have nothing to do with religion itself. Therefore, it's crucial to distinguish between religion as a system of values and beliefs, and those who have infiltrated it with malicious intent to use it as a cover for their destructive activities. These anti-cult operatives and their allies within the Russian Orthodox Church have turned this country into a staging ground for their activities and launched a targeted, terrorist attack on democratic countries from there. The radical ideology of RATSEERS, which originated in Russia, now extends its influence far beyond its borders. Anti-cult organizations hold particularly strong positions in China, France, and Germany, where they have secured significant support from authorities or individual representatives. This support allows them to exert influence over legislative, judicial, and law enforcement bodies. One of the prominent representatives of this international terrorist network is the European Federation of Centers for Research and Information on Sectarianism, FECRIS, headquartered in Paris. France, a country with a long tradition of democracy, has unexpectedly become part of the criminal anti-cult movement's scheme, with 90% of FECRIS's activities funded by the state budget. Additionally, anti-cult activities are institutionalized in France through the Interministerial Commission Miviludes. However, the actions of this commission, as well as those of FECRIS, have repeatedly faced criticism from the international community, including for employing violent deprogramming methods, forcing individuals to renounce their beliefs through literal tortures, against members of various religious groups. Both FECRIS and Ratzirs comprise a number of organizations. The FECRIS and Ratzirs networks are closely interconnected. They operate under a unified policy, use identical methods, and maintain close relationships. For instance, Alexander Dvorkin, president of Ratzirs and Russia's leading anti-cultist, also served as vice president of FECRIS and still remains a member of its board of directors. Additionally, Ratzir's vice president and Dvorkin's associate, Orthodox archpriest Alexander Novopashin, is also a corresponding member of FECRIS. Currently, the participation of Ratzir's representatives within FECRIS has been officially suspended. This was done to conceal the influence of Russian participants on FECRIS's ideology and to avoid accusations of active support for Russian propaganda against Ukraine during the escalation of the military conflict between these two countries. Despite their official charters, claiming adherence to international conventions on human rights and freedoms, the reality is that anti-cult organizations operate in a starkly different manner. Since their inception, these anti-cult organizations have repeatedly discredited themselves through anti-democratic and unlawful activities, which include the deliberate spread of lies and slander, intentional incitement of violence, the use of destructive manipulative techniques, the instigation of conflicts fueled by interreligious hatred, and the targeted persecution of dissenting groups, sometimes even leading to physical assaults. Officially, the anti-cult umbrella organization FECRIS includes groups based in Europe, while Ratzirs encompasses organizations in Russia and the CIS countries. Both associations actively collaborate with anti-cultists from the United States. American anti-cultist Stephen Hessen has attended conferences organized by FECRIS. Hessen was also a guest lecturer at one of educational clubs in Russia, where the anti-cultist Alexander Dvorkin is a regular lecturer too. Moreover, Hessen has repeatedly traveled to Russia with his lectures at the invitation of Russian anti-cultists. Dvorkin published a book titled 10 Questions to an Obtrusive Stranger, which entirely mirrored a chapter from Hessen's book. Moreover, Dvorkin actively recommends Hessen's books, and their rhetoric about the dangers of cults is identical, often echoing each other word for word. This synchronization of narratives indicates regular information exchange and collaboration, suggesting a direct and close relationship between Hessen and Dvorkin. A closer examination reveals the influence of the anti-cult ideological center on both social and political processes in the United States. This will be discussed in more detail later. Another fact pointing to the influence of the anti-cult ideological center on the US is that in the 1990s, American newspapers, including prestigious outlets like the New York Times, suddenly began actively quoting Alexander Dvorkin and his subjective assessments of so-called cults, not only in Russia, but in other countries as well. Doesn't it seem odd that the comments of a Russian cult expert suddenly appear in such well-known newspapers as the New York Times? It's noteworthy that the views and comments of a relatively unknown Russian cult expert were featured in the New York Times. Despite the usual difficulty of achieving such exposure, even for top-level experts. This could be the result of financial investments, or bribery of the media, or even the presence of certain influence agents within the media. Regardless, this indicates the existence of a coordinated force to integrate the opinions of Russian extremist anti-cultists into American publications. Now, using the activities of the umbrella organizations Fekris and Ratsiers and their leaders as examples, let's examine the criminal methods of their operation, which might qualify the activities of anti-cult organizations as terrorist acts. How do anti-cult organizations operate, and what is their role in executing the enemy's global plan to destroy democracy?
In the flood of news, many of you have come across terms like destructive cults, totalitarian sects, or even killer cults.
Dangerous and abusive cult.
Totalitarian cults.
Cults. The word cult.
The cult. Cult.
Shocking cults.
Representatives of anti-cult organizations label selected groups without relying on factual evidence, police investigations, or thorough complex theological analysis. Instead, they follow entirely different playbooks, which have no relation to theoretical science or even to objective reality.
While the term cult is a key stigmatizing term in the United States, in Europe and the post-Soviet countries, this role is played by the term sect, especially totalitarian sect, which also carries a strong derogatory and stigmatizing connotation. Since 1993, anti-cult movement ideologue Alexander Dvorkin has widely introduced the term totalitarian sect into post-Soviet media. The term totalitarian, borrowed from political science and propaganda language of the Cold War era, evokes associations with oppression, camps, imprisonment, barbed wire, forced labor, and meager food. Thus, this term is used to incite fear, anxiety, and a biased attitude toward the members of organizations labeled as totalitarian sects. The vagueness of the terms totalitarian sect and destructive cult allows anti-cultists to baselessly categorize any organization under these labels.
However, the use of terms such as sect, cult, totalitarian sect, and destructive cult is not supported by the laws of most countries or international legal documents. These terms lack legal justification, and their use contradicts the legislation on freedom of conscience and religious associations. Nonetheless, anti-cultists continue to use these terms as weapons of accusation and incite the media to use them.